Welcome to the Millennium Beat Podcast, where we like to encourage the world one story at a time. Now get ready to hear stories from around the world that encourage and uplift you. Now to the show with your host, Kevin James. Joel Thornton, I'd like to thank you for being on again. I think this is your fourth time, a couple times in person and a couple times on the computer. So thanks for being here.
Well, it's always good to be with you, Kevin.
Thank you. Your subject that you like to talk about is dealing with transgender. And we're going to be talking today a little bit about past, now, and future, dealing with the topic of transgender. So let's jump into it. Let's go back to the Trump administration and some of the things that were helpful and maybe some of the things that weren't helpful that he implemented.
Well, you know, he was really good on this issue. He banned the whole transgender movement in the military. Mm-hmm. And really, Kevin, that was a weird thing, because what was going on is transgender people were joining the military in order to get the government to pay for their surgeries.
Right.
And so they would want to reassign their sex by having, you know, what they call either top or bottom surgeries. Mm-hmm. And they were wanting the military to pay for it, which means the government pays for it, which means taxpayers pay for it.
Right.
And Trump banned that and just said, no, we're not going to do that. We won't let them serve at all. And then Obama had issued a directive to the education, all of the educators across the country, mm-hmm. saying that if you didn't allow transgender kids to use the bathroom that they wanted to use or the locker room that they wanted to use, that he was going to stop all federal funding. And Trump undid that ban as well. Okay. And said, we're not going to social engineer through our schools. We're going to allow our schools to be our schools, and kids use the bathroom of the gender they had at birth, and not a gender. You know, the transgenders love to call it a gender that's assigned at birth. We're not talking about a gender assigned at birth. We're talking about the gender you're born with, scientifically, physically, genetically, all of those things. And so Trump was really good on this issue, which was a little bit surprising to me, because Trump is very open and sympathetic to the whole LGBTQ community, generally speaking, although he got a fairly bad rap with that. But I think he was probably as open to anybody in politics other than Barack Obama. I mean, had he followed up George W. Bush or even Bill Clinton, he would have been considered very progressive on these issues. But he followed up Obama, mm-hmm. and he just wasn't willing to force these issues down people's throats, and not willing to force it to say, we're going to require you to do these things based on sexual orientation or gender. And I think that was a very positive thing about Trump. It was one of the more successful things I think he did.
Mm-hmm. Now, he wasn't opposed of transgender people being in the military. He was more opposed to the fact that they didn't want the country, us taxpayers, to pay for it.
Right. He just refused to allow the surgeries to happen and to be assigned out in the military, mm-hmm. because he said, we're not going to open that can of worms and start having the government paying for these surgeries, because it'll end up becoming the one place you can go that you can get the surgeries. You sign up for the military for 2 years. While you're there, you declare you're a woman, and now you want your surgery. Mm. And so he shut all that down. I suspect you'll see that start to ramp back up now.
Okay. So now that's the military. What about things in school back during the Trump administration? Parents not knowing their kid is being transgender, mentally changed, things like that. What was happening in that time period?
He was good on that issue too. He rescinded Obama's letter of determination to the schools through the Department of Justice, and they wrote a different letter saying that we're not going to allow the transgender students to have access to the bathrooms and locker rooms. There's always been a push in the schools, and it's not coming from the government. This is coming from all of the advocates and the people, the agenda-driven people, mm-hmm. that are saying, look, don't tell the parents that the kids are transgender if you suspect that the parents aren't going to be open to this. If you think that, and I've seen a lot of this information comes from the ACLU, from GLSEN, and other gay advocacy groups that'll say, just keep the parents out of this. So they'll go so far as to tell teachers that when you work with the kids, you call them whatever name they want to go by. Mm-hmm. You call them by whatever pronouns they want. So if you've got a little boy that says, I think I'm a girl and I want to be called Jane instead of Jim, and I want you to call me she instead of he, they'll encourage the teachers to do that in the classroom, but when they have a parent-teacher conference, to go back to calling them with the names that are on their records that the parents expect, so as to keep the parents from knowing that these kids are transgender.
Right.
with the idea being that we don't want these parents to get mad at the kids and angry and do all these mean things to the kids, like parents are going to abuse their kids over this. And it's a very deceptive practice. Now, that's not coming out of the schools. It's being pushed upon the schools.
Oh, okay.
Educators are pretty solid people for the most part. You got liberals, conservatives, and moderates in education, and most educators don't want to manipulate kids and don't want to drive the social agenda. They really got into education because they love kids and they want to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
But these agenda-driven groups were pushing this stuff really big under Obama. They were still pushing it under Trump, but they weren't getting any help from the Department of Education.
Okay.
Now they'll get help from the Department of Education in the new world we live in now with Biden.
Okay, let's go talk a little bit about. I want to get to the part of the field that you're as a lawyer to deal with the rights of the parents who are fighting the fact that their kid is being transgended. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about sports. We're now, in the past, during Trump's administration, dealing with the fact that a boy cannot be in a girl's sporting event because it's,
yeah,
we're not made that way.
Biden has issued an executive order that declares that you have to allow children to participate in sports based on what they believe their sex is rather than what their sex actually is. So that boys, it's really a weird phenomenon, Kevin. You don't have a lot of girls claiming to be boys and then trying to compete in boys' sports.
Right. I've only heard in my lifetime a few times some girls have played football. I've heard of that.
Right, but when they did that, like the girl that just played football in NCAA Division I, she came in as a girl. Right. She wasn't claiming to be a guy. Right. And therefore had to be eligible for the football team. She came in as a girl. She was a kicker. She was a soccer player. She was a world champion soccer player and said, I want to kick on the football team. And they allowed her to do that. So, that's a whole different issue. What we're talking about is boys that are claiming to be girls. And I'm not doubting the sincerity of these kids. The trouble is that physiologically men are built differently than women. Boys are built differently than girls. We have more muscle mass. We have stronger, denser bones. We have larger lung and heart capacity, which means that we can generate more oxygen and more blood flow, which means that we can compete at a higher level. Here's an example of sports. The fastest woman in the world right now in the 100-meter dash, if you took her, I think her time is 46.25 seconds. That doesn't sound right, but anyway, her time, if you took her time as a world record holder, there are 300 boys in high school right now that are beating that time.
Oh, wow.
And she's the woman's record holder in running. That gives you an idea of what a huge difference. This woman has won more gold medals in the Olympics than Usain Bolt. Wow. The fastest man in the history of the world. And yet she's not any faster than high school boys. Now, that's not to belittle her. Right. That's to say that it's not fair to let boys compete against her because they have a body advantage that a girl will never have in anything that requires endurance, quickness, strength, all of those things. And, running is all about how much oxygen and blood you can get into the muscles over a continued period of time. Right. And so that's an unfair advantage that boys have in those sports. And that's why when you see boys get over here and compete in girls' sports, they always do really well. They go to the top of the food chain. And it's not fair to girls. And the irony is that this is creating some very strange bedfellows, if you will. Right. It's creating a market where radical gay and lesbian feminists are radically against men competing in women's sports. They feel like they spent the last 40 or 50 years carving out a place for women in sports through the Title IX programs. Right. And the Title IX law that was passed into law in the 70s. And so they feel like we finally got what we deserve. We've got our own space and we're getting treated equally because they're required to have the same basic number of scholarships in the college for girls and boys, regardless of how much revenue is generated by the sports, because most of the revenue in colleges, in the NCAA Division I in particular, is generated through football and then basketball. And then baseball might generate a little bit, but football and basketball are the money makers. And the Title IX laws have forced them to disperse that money throughout the universe, the university universe, right, so that girls are getting a fair share of that. now after they've spent all this time carving out this space, suddenly they're losing the ability to compete because they're now saying that boys should be allowed to come over into this universe that should be occupied only by girls. And that's so it's creating some really strange alliances because there's a lot of people that are saying this just isn't fair. It's not the way that sports are supposed to be. You can't. It's like saying we're gonna allow 15-year-olds to compete against 10-year-olds in basketball.
Right.
And we're no longer going to bind them by their age. And 99 times out of 100, the 15-year-olds are going to be better than the 10-year-olds. You're going to find a 10-year-old every now and then that comes along that's a prodigy that can compete with the 15-year-olds. But that's the exception, not the rule.
Right. All right. So that's some of the past things. Now we have a new president in office, President Biden. And we've talked a little bit about some of the changes he's already made. Let's talk a little bit more of some of the things that you see that he has done or probably will be doing in the future, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I mean, he seems really driven to push this agenda, like even more so than Obama. I mean, Obama didn't start off with this kind of bang. Of course, Obama had to learn how to run the executive office because he'd never been in that kind of power, and Biden has as vice president. But he really seems bound and determined to drive this agenda on the transgender, the same-sex issues, all the LGBTQ issues. He seems really like he's going to push it harder than anybody has before, and I think it's going to be some very strange times. Now you've got the courts are poised to uphold the right of women in sports. Now the difference will be now under Obama or under Biden, you'll have the courts, when they file these cases, the Department of Justice will be joining the side of the transgender kids. Under Trump, you had the Department of Justice joining the court cases on the side of the non-transgender kids, or the women in the sporting issue. So they were issuing directives and guidances that said Title IX is not a gender-specific title; it's a sex-specific title, and sex is a genetic marker, and you can't change it, and we're going to live with it the way it is. So you had really good support from the government in these cases. What's going to happen now is you're not going to get any support in the government. Okay. So, for example, if somebody sues the government over the transgender issues, over transgender laws, you're going to find the Department of Justice will not even put up a defense. They'll just say, no, these laws are right, and they're not going to be willing to join them. We had that happen several times in the abortion cases, when abortion cases would come through where the Department of Justice would not join on the side of a pro-life plaintiff, even though that was the government that was being sued. They wouldn't come in on the same side. They would come in on the side of the people that sued them. And they're going to do that in the transgender. So they have a transgender person suing the government over this issue, and the government has an obligation to defend the laws and to put up a defense. But instead of doing that, you'll start to see the Department of Justice go over to the plaintiff's side and issue all their briefs in support of the plaintiff's motion, and there'll be nobody there to defend the side of the law against the transgenders. Which is a really twisted way to do it, because now the courts are in a quandary, because how do you make a decision when you haven't had anybody put up a defense?
I don't know. One of the things I will ask you is, how do you think the response to the Christian world will react to all this stuff? Because we're getting censored. I mean, you can see it in the politics that, we were censored, the conservative Christian viewpoint, but it's going to get more in the other things, such as transgender and stuff like that, where you can't say certain things, you can't be against certain things, otherwise you get censored. What do you think is going to be going on in that realm?
I think it's going to be a fight, but I think at the end of the day, the First Amendment wins.
Okay. And,
that's the one issue, though, is right now, most everybody's outlet for their free speech is through social media. And social media is not government run, so you don't have a First Amendment right there.
Right.
When they shut you down, they're a private business. Now, they're very much in bed with the government. They've been given a lot of grants and a lot of leeway and a lot of legal help from the government. So it's quasi-government. But at the end of the day, social media can do what they want to do unless the government gets it under control, and they're not going to over the next 4 years.
No.
You're not going to see them going, well, we got to stop this censoring of conservative speech, because the side that's in power now likes the censorship. It's ironic that, the Democrats of the 60s that were the free thinkers and the free society and the free speech and the anti-war and the pro-drugs and the Summer of Love kids, they're all now on the opposite side of these constitutional issues where they used to be purist. Mm-hmm. And they used to say, we believe in speech, you got to allow all speech. But it's just like what happened in the evolution cases. Mm-hmm. When the Scopes monkey trial was going on, the lawyers for evolution said, we don't want to take creationism out of the schools. We just want the chance to have an equal hearing for evolutionary theory. So we're not telling you that you can't go in the schools and teach creation, and we don't want you to take it out. We just want to have a chance to teach evolution. As soon as they were allowed to teach evolution, they began working to shut down the right to offer any theories on creation except evolution. So they immediately began to do the opposite of what they said they wanted to do. And that's what you're seeing now, is now that they have power, they don't mind cutting out speech they don't like, which is always a dangerous proposition.
No, you're talking about private companies or government on that?
I'm talking about government on this. I'm talking about the liberal Democrats.
Okay.
And now that they're they're happy with social media shutting all this down.
Right.
Because it just makes it where conservatives can't get their voice out.
Right.
And so what you're going to see is they're going to continue to allow that to happen rather than stepping up and trying to stop it, because they don't want to stop it.
Right. They keep it going. They're kind of putting a blind eye to things. They're turning their head to the situation of being censored. Think about being censored on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and any other provider is you have no place to go to fight. You go to their words if they're a fact checker. And I've had people that I know that have facts about something that they did themselves, and they were fact checked that they were wrong.
No, I know, and the trouble is, I got banned from Twitter a couple of times, and I would appeal the ban, and you don't ever hear back from them.
No,
it's not like they respond and go, "Hey, we looked at it and decided you're wrong, and you're still banned." They would just go, "Man, you take the tweet down, you can be back on."
Right.
And I had a 7-day suspension that lasted a month and a half because I couldn't get them to respond, and I filed 3 appeals trying to get them to respond, and they never acknowledged the appeal at all. Mm-hmm. And so you don't have any recourse in a situation like that.
No, not like a government. You have the law and stuff like that. They're privately owned. They can do what they want. If you don't like it, there's the road. You can take it and go somewhere else. But unfortunately today, such as Facebook, Twitter, there's not really many opportunities, because look at Parler became a conservative, voice in a sense that this is free speech and stuff like that. And so Apple, Google, and all that said, okay, well, if you want to not guide by our rules, we're not going to put you in our app store. And then that was fine.
Shut down their servers.
So, and then, Amazon says, "Hey, I'll do even one better. You're kicked out of our place. You can't put your program on our server." So, I mean, as I said, we've seen this. I hope people's eyes were open, because it was politics, a lot of politics, and and people being censored and stuff. But the next step is the Christian world. I mean, very much that, if you don't say something that they like, you're banned. Like you were banned on Twitter for a while, and I basically got rid of Twitter anyway. I don't care. But unfortunately, we have Facebook and YouTube, which I've been talking to people that says we need an alternative. But again, if we have our video somewhere else, who's supplying the server? They could make a decision. Unless you have your own server, which was costly, very costly. Maybe, one day maybe Trump will start his own server company, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take that. I know a lot of people are moving their stuff offshores, even their websites. They're moving them offshore so they don't have to worry about the censorship issues. Because you're going to see that more and more. There's a lot of hacks that are going on conservative websites right now, even churches, where they'll have 20 or 30,000 bots attacking them, trying to shut down their websites and trying to crash their servers, just because they don't like the message of the church or they don't like the message of a conservative. And that part is troubling to me, because this is how we communicate with the world now. We communicate with the world through social media. And if you don't have access to social media, then you can't communicate. And if your message doesn't get out, and then if you add to that the government having access or control of the schools, and the government deciding what's going to be taught in the schools and what isn't going to be taught, and what we're going to do in the bathrooms and what we're not going to do in the bathrooms, and all those things, then you've got a world that you don't have any control over the message that your children are getting while they're at school.
Right.
And then when you've got parents who are being told, we don't care what you think, stay out of this, you don't have a right to speak, the kids are at school, they belong to us. So what do you do about that? That's one of the reasons I'm working with this organization, Child and Parental Rights Campaign, in order to fight for parental rights, because parents ought to have the ultimate say-so in what happens to their children.
Now, do you feel your workload is going to increase 100-fold now?
It's going to blow through the roof, Kevin.
Yeah,
it's going to go. It's going to explode, because we're getting calls from all over the country. We've got a case in Arizona right now with a family that the Arizona Child Protective Services has taken the child and won't give the child back because the parents won't affirm the child wanting to become a boy. And that kind of craziness is starting to go on in more and more places around the country. And so it's just going to get worse and worse. It's not getting better, because for some reason, the science, the party of science, the Democrats who told us we've got to follow the science, we've got to do what the science says, are ignoring the science on the transgender issues.
Right. So other than the things that we've talked about a little bit about, you see the trend, what other trends that maybe we haven't mentioned that you might see kind of foretell in the future here that they're going to be going after? Some other things. We've got the military, we've got the schools, we've got the sports. Is it corporations, like working, obviously.
They're already going after corporations like MyPillow.
Oh, yeah.
You've got this cancel culture is going after everybody, and they're going after churches, and they're trying to shut churches down in different live venues and things like that. And you got the government in California working hard to shut down the church. The government's in New York doing that. So I think that's going to continue. There's a backlash to all this, because people are generally conservative in America, and they generally don't like the government intervening, and they don't like one party being in power. We've learned that over and over again.
Right.
That we've got these guys need to remember there's an election coming up in 2 years, and they can't count on being able to corruptly overthrow all these elections, because all of that information on the election is going to come out over the next 2 years.
Right.
And you're going to see states in this year in their general assemblies and their different works that the legislatures are doing in states. You're going to see them working to tighten up their election laws in a lot of places, especially conservative states like Georgia. You'll see some tightening up of election laws, so there's not so much room for fraud going on. Right. And so they can't count on fraudulently winning these elections, and the voting population is going to turn against them, frankly. I mean, I see that happening in the next election, possibly the election after that, that you'll see it turning. Part of it depends on whether or not the Republicans become a voice for conservative people or not. Because the Republicans kind of let us down on this last election. Big time. It's not enough to hate Trump. You've got to stand for something, and you can't just stand for getting somebody out. And they didn't stand for the right things. When you look at the stimulus package, $2.3 trillion we're spending, a lot of it going overseas, and Republicans voted for it just like Democrats did. Right. And they didn't offer any explanation for it. They just said, well, we got to have it. We're going to vote for it. And somebody's got to stop. At some point, somebody has to say, we can't keep spending money we don't have, especially for people that we're not in charge of. I used to always have a saying: if the America was a company, it would be bankrupt. And it would be it would making its own money, so it prints its own money, and it would be not existing anymore. Because if a person like myself or yourself spend more money than we make, eventually credit is going to catch up to us. None of us can live like this. Yeah, and you get the government constantly say, "Oh, I need another $1 trillion. Hey, go print another $1 trillion up," and then there's nothing backing. You're having to sell that off to China to get them to approve it and all this stuff. So you're just creating this false sense of well-being, and at some point the government's got to stop. I have a friend who said, I used to say the government spends money like a drunken sailor, but I feel like now I have to apologize to drunken sailors, because I used to be a drunken sailor, and I know that when I ran out of money, I quit spending. Right. And not the government. Not even doing that. No. They'll just keep printing it, and they'll just keep doing it, and next thing you know, we're so far in debt. Well, our grandchildren, many generations down the road are still paying the bill. Yeah, and we're there. I mean, we've passed that point. So
Already,
at some point, somebody's got to say enough is enough, and it doesn't look like the Republicans are going to be any better than the Democrats at that.
What do you think about the cause of having another third party? You think that would be good or bad?
I'm all in.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's good, and here's why. But it's got to be a party that can draw 10 to 15% of the vote.
Right.
You don't have to have more than that, but you need enough of the vote so that nobody can have a 50% majority without talking to the coalition.
Right.
So, for example, if you're in the Senate and you have and you have 15% of the vote, you have 15 members of the Senate that are in your new party.
Mm-hmm.
So the Democrats have 40 people. The Republicans have 45 people. Neither one of them have a 51 majority. Mm-hmm. So nobody's in charge. They've both got to reach out to that third party. It's what Europe does all the time. You have to build coalitions to get anything done.
Right.
So it automatically invites the one thing that's supposed to work in politics, and that is compromise. Mm-hmm. Compromise is a really bad word in the Christian world, because compromise in your faith, compromise in your beliefs, compromise in your morality is a bad thing. But compromise in your politics is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And so if you had a party that could pull about 15 to 20% of the vote, you would have enough of the vote in a third party that both of the parties would have to deal with them. So the Democrats, say they had 40 senators, if they pull over the senators from the independent party, if they can pull them all over, then they suddenly have a majority for this vote. And if the Republicans can pull them over for something else, they have a majority. So you kind of go back and forth with it. Right. And it keeps everybody in check better. I think it's a great idea.
Okay. I know we're all, us Republicans are thinking of, they let us down a lot, and why keep supporting people that are wishy-washy, waffling. And,
I made a vow on Facebook that I'm done. Right. I'm not voting for any Republicans in office in any more elections.
Right. Yeah, you've seen a lot there you're in Rome, Georgia, so you've seen a lot go on with your Georgia state runoff of your senators.
Yeah, I watched this whole thing be corrupt, and I watched nobody step up to fix it. Nobody step up to go, hey, we've got to figure out. Listen, here's what we still don't know at this moment, Kevin. We don't know how corrupt this last election was. We don't know if it was enough to overthrow the election results or not. We just don't know.
Right.
But we know there was enough there that it needs to be looked at. And yet nobody's willing to really look at it. Everybody's kind of dodging around going, well, we'll just fix it for the next time. But this time was fine. And I'm convinced that in Georgia, Donald Trump and David Perdue won the general election in November.
Yeah.
It was, Trump lost by about 12,000 votes, 12,500 votes, I think it was. And there's no doubt in my mind that there was more than 12,000 illegal votes cast in Georgia for Joe Biden. Perdue lost by he was, a fraction of a percentage away from winning the election outright. I think the same thing happened to him. That changes the outcome of everything in Georgia. It changes the makeup of the Senate right there, that one action. And so I don't know that there was enough in other states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, to overturn the election or not. We won't know that for a year or two probably.
Right.
But at some point we'll know it. But Republicans didn't stand up and didn't do the right thing. And
no.
I think if they started a Patriot Party, I'd join tomorrow.
I probably would be right with you. One of the things I'm thinking about is people don't realize this. We can't use that F word because then we get banned. They'll put something under, which drives me crazy. They'll put something under a YouTube video like Joe Biden is president of the United States if you use the F word. It used to be a swear word. Now it's just a normal word. But this has been going on. We haven't noticed it. I mean, it's probably gone on before, but from Clinton, all the way up from Clinton, all the way up, even the Bushes, because as a Republican, we got our Republican president. Oh, great. But there might have been fraud during that time period.
Well, we know there was fraud in the 1960 election between Kennedy and Nixon.
Right.
Nixon walked away from it and said, I'm not willing to destroy the country just to become president right now.
Right.
And we know that Kennedy's father bought votes in Illinois and about 4 other states. Mm-hmm. Now, that's come out over a period of time, but Nixon knew it at the time. Mm-hmm. And that's been the cry all along as well. We should do like Nixon and not destroy the country over an election. But that's not the point. The point is, if we're not having free and fair elections, then then what's the point?
Right.
Why even bother to go vote? If my vote doesn't matter,
right, I
why
agree.
go vote? And I'm not talking about it doesn't matter because the vote I'm talking about if it doesn't matter because there's so much fraud that it doesn't matter what you do, they're gonna turn the election. Then why bother voting? Why?
Well, especially when they stop. I mean, elections usually run through, and it's done at 3:00 in the morning. This year, they said, "Okay, multi-states, we're stopping. We're all going home and go to bed."
And then they didn't go home and go to bed.
They did, right. They didn't go home and go. But never in life, just those kind of weird things that, I don't, there's a lot of things that went on. I wasn't there. I can't speak. If Republican people could not oversee things, they were, put across the room or kicked out of the building. All those things are not legit. I mean, right there alone should say there's something going on.
That's what I'm saying is we deserve to have a look at this, and we will. All of these lawsuits that were filed, I think they finally got, the last number I heard, I think was 87, that, all 87 lawsuits were dismissed. That shows there was no fraud, but it doesn't, or it shows there was no widespread fraud is what George Stephanopoulos says. But the truth of the matter is we don't know, because they were all thrown out on procedural grounds. None of them were thrown out because there were no facts presented. They were thrown out because the judges didn't want to deal with it. Judges don't like to overturn elections. Right. Because it puts the country in a rough place. So the judges didn't have the courage to deal with it, and so they moved on. And we don't know, but we'll eventually find out, because most of those cases are being appealed. Mm-hmm. At some point, an appellate court will order a lower court to go back and look at the evidence and see what the evidence suggests. I know a couple of cases in Georgia. A friend of mine filed one case in Georgia that shows there were about 20,000 fraudulent votes cast in Georgia at just a cursory look through the Secretary of State's records. Mm-hmm. And those 20,000 votes, you can bet they were almost all for Biden. Biden won by 12,500 votes. You throw out those 20,000 votes, Trump wins Georgia. Mm-hmm. It doesn't take a massive voter fraud effort to change an election that's that close. Right. The same thing in Arizona. Arizona's election was about 11 or 12,000. So it doesn't take hundreds of thousands of illegally cast votes to turn these elections. It doesn't take manipulating the machines. When you allow mail-in votes to come in and then you don't check the signatures, mm-hmm. you don't have any ID requirements at the polls, you're letting people vote 2 or 3 times. All of those things we know go on in every election. The question is, does it rise to the level of fraudulent election to overturn the results? Mm-hmm. And that's what we need an answer to. And I think we'll have an answer. It's just going to be too little too late. Right.
The ship has already been hit and sinking. There's a lot of corruption in the government. What can the church do, you think? I mean, it's because we have different views. Right now, I've told Charlie and other people, we're in a prophetic war right now. The prophets are against each other. You have the ones that believe Trump should have stayed in office and won. And then you have the other ones that have repented and, given up in a sense and just repented, for missing it.
Right. Right. Well, we're a constitutional republic, and so the Constitution ultimately rules. And at the end of the day, Trump did the right thing by walking away. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Even though he believes he was cheated out of the election, and I do too, it was still the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. What we have to do as the church has to. I remember when I first started working with Jay Sekulow, mm-hmm. he used to say this all the people were all the time trying to get him engaged in politics. And up until Bush became president, he never engaged. But he would say to people that would talk about that, he'd go, look, you got to remember one thing, that this is important to the church. Politics never raised anybody from the dead. Mm-hmm. Politics is not the answer. Right. We've been blessed to have 4 years of Trump as a church that supported our conservative values, and it makes life better when you have a government that supports your conservative values. Right. But the most thriving church in the history of the world was a church that was oppressed and persecuted to mm-hmm. death in the first century AD. Right. It was the first church that was basically thrown out of Jerusalem, spread across the world because they were trying to not get killed. Right. And as a result, they started what became and once the church was accepted under Constantine in the 300 ADs, about 300 years after the church was created, once it was accepted by the government, the church began to have problems. And it's flagged. You look at the church in China. Church in China is doing amazing, mm-hmm. but they're tearing down the buildings. They're killing people. Right. And I'm not advocating for the government to kill Christians and to tear down our buildings, but I'm just saying that we've got to be careful not to think that government is our solution. And that was part of the problem with Trump. That was the one negative mm-hmm. of Trump, is that it was easy to just go, well, Trump will take care of it. Let's don't worry about it. Christians need to be praying.
Right.
They need to be on their knees, looking out, crying out to God. God, redeem our land. Don't judge our land yet. Give us some more time. Let us get this fixed. Let us correct this. Let us solve this abortion issue. Let us solve. Let us solve the transgender issue. Let us become a righteous nation again, and not count on the government to do it. The church has got to do it. This is the church's job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's just, it's like, what is this? A Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore, as one saying. And it's not, America is not the America of our grandparents. Even growing up in the 80s and 70s and stuff like that. And, it's like, oh man, it was so nice back then. We haven't even started feeling the persecution yet of speech.
We're not being persecuted in America. To this day, we're still not being persecuted.
No, not yet.
Christians.
No, not yet. It's just
we're definitely on the road towards that if something doesn't change. And listen, we're being mocked, we're being discriminated against, we're being made fun of,
right.
But nobody's dying for their faith in America.
No, and hopefully it won't get to that point. But again, what persecution is, that's where the church grows. It's pressure. Right. When you put pressure on the church, it has to expand. It has to get it's like COVID-19. Where did the church go? It says, okay, can't meet in the buildings anymore. Well, we can only meet out in the streets or Zoom or whatever. We have to do something different. We're not in a building anymore. So something has changed.
We've got to become relevant to the culture.
Right.
And that's the main thing that's been missing from the church for a long time.
Well,
is we've had relevance inside the church, but we haven't been relevant to the culture in a long time.
Mm-hmm. And we got to get bold enough to be speaking what is truth, whatever happens to us, whether we get banned. It's like when I do shows. I do podcasts and stuff like that, and I can't be worried about like if one of my guests or I might say something that somebody might not agree with, and next thing you know, I'm banned or whatever. It says, you got to speak your mind. You got to speak what God has put in your heart. And a lot of Christians need to do that. They can't be afraid to hide in the building and say, well, I don't want to get persecuted. I don't want to get people not like me or whatever. Get over it. It's just like, hey, you're going to get persecuted anyway, whether you say something or not. And I said that to somebody yesterday. You might as well say something.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it's still going to get persecuted.
Yeah, and listen, if you're not willing to be persecuted for your faith, you might need to get saved.
Yeah, right.
Listen, Jesus suffered the ultimate for setting up the faith.
Mm-hmm.
The Apostle Paul, Peter, all of the apostles except for John suffered the greatest suffering they could and gave the greatest sacrifice they could. Thomas gave the greatest sacrifice of all by laying down his life and becoming the first martyr for the church after Jesus. All of those things were important to the church. Most of the people in the church weren't called to die.
Right.
Not even in the first century. Most of the people in the first century church lived and continued to live and died of old age or some disease or whatever killed people in the first century.
Right.
But yet there were some people that were called to stand so firm that they were willing to die, and other people that were called to stand so firm they were willing to die, but they didn't have to die.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that God requires our death. We have to be willing to give our life.
Right.
In order to redeem life on this planet. That's how the gospel works. That's why it's the true way to God, and it's not just some made up man-made religion, because it's not about just becoming a better person. It's about being willing to die to yourself in order that God can live through you.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm trying to do a study on John the Baptist, because John the Baptist, he was against the government because I'm not sure all these names. It was a Herod, or I don't know who was having an affair. And basically he was against it, and he spoke against it, and basically I got his head cut off, but he stood his ground and he spoke what was right, and what the government, which at that time was doing, was wrong. And he pointed out to him, hey, you're doing something wrong. And I think we need to have more John the Baptist in people right now of saying, hey, I don't stand for that. I don't care what you do to me. This is not God. This is not God's principles. You need to repent,
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, Kevin. I think that it's time for people of principle to stand up and say, I'd rather live a righteous life than a long life.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather stand out and stand up for God than live to be 90 years old.
Right.
And we're kind of trapped by the niceness of life in America.
Right.
To looking at longevity as being the determination of whether or not we've lived a good life. And it's not. It's about what have we done for God's kingdom? How have we brought the kingdom into the world?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up a little bit here. One of the things you do, I was listening to you the other day. You're on a radio program in Rome, right? Rome. Yeah, that's where you're from. So, talk a little bit about that because you're on there quite often. I mean, you weren't on the last couple of days.
Friday morning.
Every Friday morning. Okay. Where can people find you there?
You can catch us on Facebook. We're at WLAQ Rome, ROME, like Rome, Italy. It's WLAQ1410.com. You can catch it live on there as well on their website. It's just a local talk show. It was just a local interest talk show, and I started doing it, and the guy asked me to do it every Friday. So I come on every Friday, and we talk about national, international events. We're going to be turning a lot of attention to the transgender issues going forward. We're going to turn attention to human trafficking and those issues going forward as well, because I've got a big initiative coming up on that.
Okay.
But I kind of come in and talk about whatever's going on politically around the world and particularly in America these last few months. I mean, it's all been about the election and Trump and the aftermath of all that. And I try to bring common sense to these political ideas. I'm very conservative in my belief system. I'm more moderate in social issues like how we treat immigrants, how we treat the poor, what the government's role is, and things like that. But on the hard issues like life and fiscal, I'm a radical conservative. But at the same time, I believe that we've got to have a conversation, and that there's got to be room for us to disagree. And so we pride ourselves on being or disagreeing without being disagreeable.
Okay, it's cool. And that's every Friday because I catch it now. I get a notification on my watch that you've gone live, so I can tune it in on my phone or my iPad. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
so
you can always catch us on Facebook, and it's running live on Facebook on Fridays, but it's kept on the WLAQ webpage or their Facebook page so that you can go back and watch the old programs on there too.
Okay, and I'll put a link to that in the bio in the description below, so that way people can follow that and watch you and listen to you too. So, is there any place else that people can hear you or see you or anything like that?
Not right now. I do a travel blog that I haven't really kept up with it lately, but it's at joelthornton.com.
Okay.
And joelthornton.com, not .net. Yeah, joelthornton.com. You can find it there. And it's about the travels I do in Israel and Europe and other places. So, but there's not a lot of other places where I'm speaking right now. I'm about to start doing a little bit more speaking publicly around the country as things open back up. So there'll be opportunities as time goes on. Yeah,
I know we got a couple events. I have to talk to Charlie about it. I think we have a meeting up at Brian Higby's church, but I haven't got the details yet. And I know
we're going to have a meeting in Branson in April.
Branson, and that's what I heard.
We're going to have one up in Pennsylvania in I think in May, and then we're going to have one in Louisiana in September.
Okay, I know we were supposed to have one, but again, as I said, I've been sick, so I haven't had a chance to talk to him.
I think he's not doing the one
down here.
The one locally, I think they're not. I think he's talking about building a church or house in Mexico instead.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, so I got to figure out where I'm going. The East Coast one is easy because I could drive there. The Branson one, I have to fly. I'm not driving. Yeah. I'm not bringing as much equipment as I did last time. Unless I drive, and then I'll bring all kinds of video, audio equipment.
I'm sure there'll be people that are driving. I'll probably drive.
Will you? The Branson one?
Yeah, I probably will. I'll wait and see.
Yeah, I haven't got the details yet. I know the brothers were getting together and talking about it, but as I said, since I haven't really been around the office much to see Charlie, I haven't asked him what finally they decided. We had a conversation
about it right before I got on here.
Okay.
That's all fresh in my mind.
Okay, cool. All right, good. All right, well, Joel, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and putting your input into what's going on in society right now. So thanks again for being here.
Kevin, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You do a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Everybody else, thank you. You've been joined. This is the Millennium Beat, your host, Kevin James, and we'll catch you guys next week. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in today to the Millennium Beats podcast, encouraging the world one story at a time. I hope you heard something that was encouraging to you. We'd like to hear from you with your stories, so send them to stories@themillenniumbeat.com or give us a call at 407-624-9957. You may find us on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Please like and follow us and share us with your friends. You may also go to our website at www.themillenniumbeat.com, where you'll find our last 25 podcasts, our list of our different platforms you may listen to or download our podcast, our latest YouTube videos for all our shows on the Millennium Beat Network, a calendar with past and future guests for all the Millennium Beat Network shows. Also, there's pages with pictures of all our guests and hosts. You have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@themillenniumbeat.com. This has been a Millennium Beat production, copyright 2021. The guests' views and opinions may not always be the views and opinions of the Millennium Beat LLC.